Hey everybody, it's Abishur Prakash or Mr. Geopolitics. In this episode of Predictable versus Unpredictable, we'll be looking at the new US-Ukraine rare earths deal and what this means for the future of the Ukraine war. So the US and Ukraine have signed a rare earths deal after months of negotiations. This is a massive shift from just a few months ago when Zelensky visited the White House, when there was the massive blowout in the Oval Office, and the US and Ukraine were on divergent paths. At that time, Europe was stepping up and saying it would handle support for Ukraine even if America walked away. Now, fast forward 2-3 months, and the US and Ukraine have signed a rare earths deal. But this is not just a deal for access to Ukraine's resources. This is a new dynamic, a new framework for how America will support Ukraine. At the core of this deal is a new reconstruction and investment fund. This is now the vehicle that will take America's support for Ukraine, meaning all American aid going forward for Ukraine will be considered an investment in Ukraine. It'll take place through this fund. And in exchange, America will get access to Ukraine's resources, rare earths, and others. So this is a new almost barter deal where Ukraine will trade its critical resources for American support. And for America, specifically Trump, who has been wanting some kind of return on his investments, this is it. By sending aid to Ukraine as an investment, the return on that investment is access to Ukraine's critical resources and critical metals. And this is surprising, but it was predictable. A deal between the US and Ukraine, some kind of deal, whether it was through rare earths or something else, was absolutely on the table because Kyiv cannot fight Russia without America's support. And similarly, America can't just walk away from Ukraine, considering what this would do to America's global reputation. So a deal between the US and Ukraine was on the table, was predictable. This is a new chapter for American support for Ukraine, for Kyiv. Now comes the unpredictable. There is a lot more gray, a lot more uncertainty around this rare earths deal than there is clarity. This is a deal that is very shaky, that is very much a skeleton in its current form. To start with, Russia's next steps could define how successful the rare earths deal really is. A majority of Ukraine's critical resources, like rare earths, are in areas that Russia currently controls. And as it stands right now, Russia is in a very strong position vis-a-vis Ukraine. Russian troops are advancing, Russian forces are expanding in Ukraine versus Kyiv, who's suffering from a manpower shortage, who's suffering from steadfast support from the US, unshakable support from the US. Ukraine is in a far weaker position. Russia is in a far stronger position. So if Russian forces expand into Ukraine even more, then what does this mean for the resources that America wants to access? Where are these resources located? Is the US prepared to put its business or even government boots on the ground, not necessarily military boots on the ground, but business and government boots on the ground to secure these resources, to begin extracting them? And how does this work if Russian forces are nearby? So that equation itself still has to be hatched out. There is much to still be figured out regarding how close America's projects will be to Russia and how much territory Russia will gain in the near future. Second has to do with America and Ukraine itself. This is a relationship that, since Trump took office, has been very shaky. Trump and Zelensky do not see eye to eye. Their personal relationship is incredibly fractured. And because of this, the US and Ukraine are friends one day and they're clashing the next day. And this dynamic is not going to disappear just because an investment and reconstruction fund has been created. If anything, this dynamic could become even more of a problem, especially if the US demands more from Ukraine, like access to more of Ukraine's economy, like ports. And if Ukraine rejects what America wants, then suddenly this investment in a reconstruction fund could be paralyzed. And this is very important because, once again, US military aid to Ukraine will take place through this investment and reconstruction fund. So if America pulls away from this fund, then America is freezing military aid to Ukraine as it did after the blowout in the Oval Office. And if this happens, then once again, Ukraine will be put in dire straits. Equally significant and equally unpredictable is what the rest of the West will do. Will Europe, will Japan, will others mimic what Trump is doing and seek access to Ukraine's resources in exchange for more military aid? Already the UK is eyeing its own setup, and next could be France, Germany, or the entire EU. The EU has been looking for alternatives to China for critical metals for years now. They've turned to Serbia, they've turned to the Czech Republic. Now Ukraine could become another way to diversify, another supplier in a long-term timeline. Will the rest of the West start to formulate their own deals? And will this become the new requirement for Ukraine to keep allies, to keep support, to keep the taps of aid open, where it has to trade its resources for cash, for arms, for governments standing behind it? Is this the new dynamic at play? Is this the new geopolitics that Ukraine has to deal with? But lastly, and perhaps the most important unpredictable aspect, is the future of the war itself. Trump said he would end this war very quickly. Trump's ideas have been largely rebuffed. Russia is not coming to the negotiating table. Russia is not dancing how America wants. Russia and Ukraine have been unable to find any middle ground after multiple talks in Saudi Arabia, in Turkey, and elsewhere. Russia is in a far stronger position, not just militarily, but economically. The ruble was the best performing currency, according to Bloomberg. All of this means that Moscow is not desperate for a deal the way perhaps Ukraine is feeling the heat and wants to see a pause in the fighting. Equally important, Russia is assessing how united the West is. For example, the US wanted Ukraine to give up Crimea and view Crimea as Russian territory. Europe has rejected this. Europe is saying we will not view Crimea as part of Russia. So Russians are seeing that the Western unity around Ukraine is starting to collapse. And all of this is affecting Russia's next steps. But one thing Russia is not doing is signing a deal. So the Americans may be realizing that this is a war that is not going to end anytime soon. Trump may be preparing for the long haul, and Trump, as he's wanted for some time, is now going to get a return on his investment. US aid will now be viewed as an investment as America prepares to stand behind Kyiv for the foreseeable future, as this war shows no signs of slowing down. I hope you resonated with this episode of Predictable versus Unpredictable. Leave your comments below and talk soon.